Welcome to The Critique. Today, we are dissecting The Power of Deliberate Unlearning by Alfonso Borello. It's a manuscript arguing that expertise is a trap and that true growth requires surgically removing old habits, all through this pervasive computing metaphor.
It is a really high-voltage thesis. The question is that voltage actually powering the reader, or is it just, electrocuting them?
Let's start right there, with the architecture of the argument. While the central metaphor of the mind as an operating system gives it a cohesive identity, its relentless application, chapter after chapter, it risks alienating readers and just flattening the emotional core of the argument.
The commitment to the bit is, it's absolute. But that creates a real friction. The text relies almost exclusively on this aggressive software terminology.
Oh, yeah.
Kill command, ghost code, defrag, root access, bloatware, malware. You see these on almost every single page.
Right.
And by framing every human struggle as like a glitch or a script, the author is essentially dehumanizing the psychological difficulty of change. It creates a very cold distance.
It does. It treats the reader like a machine you can just fix, not a person you need to persuade.
Exactly.
And I get that the author is probably using that dehumanization to kind of shock the system, to strip away the ego. But for the reader, that intensity just creates a barrier. If I tell you your anxiety is just a corrupted file, I might be offering a solution within the metaphor, sure, but I'm also emotionally dismissing the entire experience.
It feels sterile when the solution to literally everything is delete or reboot. The complexity of human life just gets flattened into, binary code. The weakness is monotony.
So what's the fix?
I think the author needs to dilute the software metaphors, bring in some organic or physical or even architectural analogies.
Give it some texture.
Yes, texture. Something to ground these concepts in human emotion. Something that feels like it has weight, consequence, not just a digital blip on a screen.
We need something that bleeds or breaks physically, not just crashes a program.
And the manuscript actually gives us the perfect blueprint for this. It's in Chapter 3, The Scaffolding Paradox.
That one really stood out.
It's the strongest chapter because it just abandons the code metaphor for a minute. It describes standing on a ledge. The wind hitting you, the feeling of vertigo. It talks about steel beams and debris.
And it works, because scaffolding implies a physical risk. If you remove a line of code, the program crashes. If you remove scaffolding while you're standing on it,
You fall.
that visceral danger is what's missing from the rest of the book.
Right. So we could apply that same principle to, say, Chapter 5, the ego purge.
Absolutely.
Right now, that chapter struggles because it leans so hard on user interface and root access analogies. But buried in there is this small, beautiful story about a monastery, sweeping a stone floor with a broom.
I remember that part. It's the heartbeat of the chapter.
It is. But then, almost immediately, the author goes right back to talking about administrator permissions.
And it just undercuts the whole moment. So the specific edit here would be to just cut the administrator talk in that section.
Lean into the monastery.
Exactly. Lean harder into the sensory details of the stone and the broom. Let that metaphor carry the weight of the chapter. A monastery is a far more potent setting for an ego purge than a server room.
It lets the reader breathe. It provides a textural contrast that makes the return to the digital metaphor later on feel more effective.
And that emotional flattening, it's not just coming from the metaphors, it's also the volume. The pacing of the manuscript is just breathless. It's so high intensity, and it creates this shouting effect that leaves the reader no room to process anything.
Yeah, this is the manifesto trap. The tone is uniformly imperative, it's urgent. I actually went through and circled the paragraph endings, and almost every section concludes with a punchy, dramatic command. Wake up, delete it, begin.
Let it fall, end task.
Right. And when you isolate them, they sound powerful. But cumulatively, it's just editorial fatigue.
When everything is a crisis, nothing is a crisis. The reader eventually just numbs themselves to the commands because you can't possibly sustain that level of adrenaline for 300 pages.
No. And when every action is a surgical removal, a demolition, or a suicide pact, and that's phrasing from Chapter 7, nothing stands out. The book reads like it's screaming at 110% volume. It's exhausting, not inspiring.
So the solution here has to be structural. The author needs to create what you might call narrative valleys,
Aha, moments of reflection.
Or empathy, or just slower pacing, to contrast with the peaks of command. You have to let the reader sit with the difficulty of what you're asking before you scream "go" at them again.
And there's a perfect opportunity for this in Chapter 6, Operating in the Blackout. The content is all about silence, the void, induced incompetence. It's about slowing down.
But the writing isn't slow at all.
No, the sentence structure is still short, choppy, aggressive, staccato. Do not run. Sit in the dark. Wait for the signal.
So the form is completely contradicting the content? The writing style itself is rushing, even when it's telling the reader to wait.
Then when you hit the next call to action, the change in tempo will actually jolt the reader awake.
That's the control that makes it work. And you could apply this to Chapter 4 too, the kill command.
Right. It's framed as a binary logic decision. Yes or no. Keep or kill. But for a person, firing a client or quitting a committee, that's painful. So acknowledge that pain. Spend a paragraph on the guilt, the financial fear, the social awkwardness before you deliver the deleted line. If you acknowledge the cost, the command to pay it feels earned. If you pretend there's no cost, the command just feels reckless.
Okay, that brings us to the actual substance of the advice. The manuscript is excellent at diagnosing the problem of expert stagnation with these high-level concepts, but the solutions often stay in that philosophical, abstract realm, not in practical application.
This is probably the biggest gap between the promise and the delivery. Concepts like the volatile cadre or the open circuit sound revolutionary. They make for incredible chapter titles.
They do.
But they lack the messy reality of implementation. The text operates in this idealized world where you can just fire a client or collapse a command node with no consequences.
It just glosses over the fallout. The reader is told what to do, stop answering questions, destroy the hierarchy, but not how it looks when it goes wrong or meets resistance.
The black box directives in the appendix are actually fantastic. They're very practical.
They are, but they're quarantined in the back of the book.
Exactly. And the main chapters suffer for it. So the suggestion is integrate that practical friction from the real world into the main chapters. Use mini case studies or pre-mortems.
Let's take Chapter 7, the command node collapse, as an example of how that would work. The advice is to stop being the central processor for your team.
Right. So instead of just saying stop answering questions, the author should provide a specific scenario. A leader who did this and whose team, initially panicked.
Don't just show the success at the end.
No, show the messy metal. Show the silence in the Slack channel that made the leader sweat. Show the productivity drop for the first week. Show the mess. By acknowledging that transition period, you validate the reader's fear and give them a realistic roadmap, not just a fantasy.
And that validity is also missing in Chapter 8, Innovation via Subtraction. The examples are, the iPhone removing the keyboard and budget airlines removing amenities.
They're tired examples. We've all read about Steve Jobs and the iPhone 1,000 times. It feels cliché, and more importantly, it feels distant. Most readers aren't CEOs designing hardware.
Right. These high-altitude examples create a disconnect. The reader is thinking, that's great for Apple, but I'm a mid-level manager.
The fix is to use a more personal or small-scale example of via negativa. Maybe an individual career pivot, someone who removed a lucrative skill from their resume to force themselves to learn a new one.
Or a writer who deleted their best character to save the plot.
Yes, show how the reader can apply this subtraction mindset to their own calendar, their own skills, their daily habits.
That makes the advice accessible to the individual operator, which is who this book is supposed to be for. Okay, so looking at the core philosophy, there's a potential flaw in how the argument addresses its audience. It builds its strength by just villainizing stability and expertise entirely.
The straw man of stability.
Exactly. Which ignores the nuance that you actually need some foundational knowledge to improvise in the first place.
It really does. The text treats all legacy code and scaffolding as inherently bad or obsolete. It implies that being an expert is the same as being in a coma. That's the direct language from Chapter 1.
And that just attacks the reader's identity. If I'm an expert who feels stuck, and I pick up this book, and the first thing it tells me is that my expertise is garbage, I'm going to get defensive.
Of course. It ignores the fact that you need to know the rules to break the rules. You can't improvise jazz without knowing your scales. And by attacking the reader's hard-earned success so aggressively, by telling them your experience is a blockade, the author risks alienating the very people they're trying to help.
It feels like the author is trying to tear down the whole house, but without checking to see if the foundation is actually worth keeping. The suggestion has to be to acknowledge the value of the scaffold before you ask the reader to tear it down. Build from trust first.
And you could weave this right into Chapter 1, The Sedation of Mastery. The author needs to explicitly distinguish between foundational knowledge, the stuff that allows you to function, and rigid models, the stuff that blinds you.
You could say something like, your expertise got you in the room, but it's not what will get you to the next room.
Perfect. That validates the reader's past effort while still pushing them forward.
And that same nuance is critical in the anti-fragile operator section too.
Oh, absolutely. Currently, zero ground sounds like a lobotomy. We need to clarify that zero ground doesn't mean forgetting how to do your job. It's not about forgetting how to code or write or lead.
It's about forgetting the entitlement.
Exactly. It means forgetting the entitlement that comes with knowing how to do it. It's entering the problem with the skills of a master, but the curiosity of a novice. And that subtle shift prevents the advice from sounding totally reckless.
And it turns the book from a manifesto of destruction into one of renewal. It acknowledges that the reader has something to lose, which is what makes the choice to unlearn so meaningful.
If you don't respect the user's data, they're not going to let you upgrade their system. The author needs to show they understand the value of what's being deleted.
Okay, let's synthesize these points. We're looking at a manuscript with a really powerful, distinct voice. Alfonso Borello is clearly not interested in writing some gentle self-help book.
No, it has energy, and that's its greatest asset. But any asset can become a liability if it isn't managed well.
To maximize the impact, the author needs to execute on 4 things. First, dial back the monotony of the code metaphors. Let the human element breathe with some physical and sensory analogies.
Give us texture. Give us the vertigo of the ledge, the dust of the monastery.
Second, vary the pacing. Stop shouting. Create those narrative valleys so the reader can actually process the philosophy before being hit with the next command.
Use your sentence structure to control the reader's heart rate, not just their to-do list.
Third, bring the practical tools from the appendix into the main chapters. Replace those abstract titles with messy, friction-filled reality.
Don't just tell us to jump into the void. Show us how to land without breaking our legs.
And finally, validate the reader's expertise before asking them to dismantle it. Acknowledge the difference between the skills they need to keep and the rigidity they need to lose.
Respect the expert, and they'll listen to the iconoclast.
Alfonso, the raw material here is potent. It just needs some calibration. We invite you to refine the draft based on these lenses, focusing on texture, pacing, practical application, and nuance, and then submit the work again for a follow-up critique. We really want to see this version 2.0. Thanks for listening to The Critique.